Thanks again so much for joining us and welcome. This is another seminar in our Career Growth seminar series. And tonight specifically, we have a very, very interesting presentation. I am so excited to be joined here by the founder and senior coach from Signature Interview Prep, Olivia Barnard, who's actually going to share her experience working for McKinsey, as well as what it actually takes. And she's going to give you some examples working with different clients and even coaching her friends originally of getting into some of the top management consulting firms. And just in case any of you don't know me or we haven't interacted before, my name is Sergey. I'm a program director at AdmitMaster. I'm responsible primarily for our programs to help people get into business schools. And for many of you, that might be the first step of actually breaking into management consulting. So the way we're going to do things today, this is going to be, there is going to be some interaction in this presentation as well. So if you have any questions, just please continue throwing things in the chat box. There is a Q&A box as well. So if you have a question that you wish Olivia or I address at some point, then please put them there. And we will stay here for as long as we need to. But this is going to be over about an hour. We have a lot of things to share with you. So that's why, without further ado, I'm just going to now pass control over to Olivia, who is going to tell us what is it that we need to know about management consulting. And just to set things on the right frame for us, here's what we're going to do. So we're going to talk about three things today. The first thing is going to be, what do consultants really do? You know, what is actually management consulting? Because there might be a lot of anecdotes about what is it, but what do they really do? And there are many kinds of different consultants. So will they all do the same thing? What's similar? What might be different? We will be talking about something that might be really important. Is consulting really for me? Because breaking into management consulting careers takes a lot of effort. So is that something that is really worth it for me? What am I getting in return? And how do I know whether this is for me? So we'll make sure we talk about this. And then finally, of course, we're going to spend a huge chunk of time talking about how do I actually break into management consulting? What's going to be involved? Whom do I need to talk to? What kind of preparation do I need to go through? What kind of a profile do I need to make? So that's what we're going to be doing here tonight. And like I mentioned, if you do have any questions, just throw them in. We are going to be here for you. This is really to help you make the right decision. So with this, please welcome Olivia.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction, and to everyone who's on this call on a late evening, and if you're across the world, maybe it's early morning. I really appreciate the fact that you're carving in an hour of your time to listen. So I'll try to make it worth your while. As previously mentioned, here's a bit of my introduction. So Notre Dame alum, not sure if we have anyone here, but if you do, go Irish. Then I worked at McKinsey and Company, as previously mentioned. And while I was there, I was management consultant. Specifically, my role was a business analyst role. But I'm a huge fan of just coaching people. And so I ended up helping the company with resume screening, interview coaching, going back to campus to host events, workshops, just like what we're doing today, to teach people about consulting and answer questions to students. So during my time there, and even before, I was very much involved in, just coaching people and helping them on this journey. And my passion for coaching people is what inspired me to start my own company, Signature Interview Prep. And so essentially, most of my clients just want help with how can I prepare for consulting interviews. So that's how I spend most of my time. But today I will be teaching you about consulting, which is kind of a fun topic because I like to hear the anecdotes that people have. So write in the comment section. Let's start by you telling me, what is one thing you think about when you hear the word management consulting, right? When you hear that word, or your friend has said they work in consulting, what is the word that you think about, right? And another fun question is, what's a movie that you have watched that has consultants in it or depicts consulting, right? So this is one example. If you know what this movie is, put the name in the comment section, okay? So one of the things that I hear a lot of people talking about, and it's correct, is consultants are always doing short projects. They always seem to be on the move, especially pre-COVID, right? Getting on flights, going to different locations, doing all kinds of secretive short projects. Another thing that people know about consulting is they get paid a lot of money, right? Post MBA, you're looking at base salary of 165K, right? We haven't even talked about your signing bonus, right? We haven't talked about your 401k matching. We haven't talked about performance bonuses. So you're seeing post MBA people with PhDs getting over 200K in compensation here in the US, right? Again, post COVID, people used to know consultants as those people who are always traveling, always eating at fancy restaurants. One thing that I've heard some people say as well is they're always getting promoted into this roles, executive roles very quickly. So you'll see someone leave consulting and move into another company and they get a huge promotion. And then one other funny one is just Excel gurus. Consultants spend a lot of time on PowerPoint and Excel. And so you might know them for those things. But if you have another idea of what you think consultants are or do, just mention it in the chat box because I'd love to read that. But yeah, so the question for today is, what is management consulting outside of the stereotypes? What is it really, right? And so the best way to think about consulting is to think about the clients of consultants, right? You have to take a step back and try to understand if a client comes to a consulting company, what is it that they need from consultants? Okay, and so this is the short answer. The short answer is that management consultants solve complex problems for the biggest organizations in the world, Fortune 500 companies, nonprofits, and government systems. So with a data-driven approach, they help their clients do things more efficiently and do things they've never done before. So there's a difference between day-to-day operations, right? You don't hire a consultant to come in and do day-to-day operations like at the end of the month, maybe you need to do financial reconciliations. You would not hire a consultant to do that, right? Maybe HR has to run a training program that they run every 2 months. You would not hire a consultant to do that because that's everyday work. You hire consultants to solve a complex problem that's not typical business. So let's think of a unique problem that I'm sure most of you have at some point talked about over the last week. If you haven't talked about this, then mention it in the comments, but I'm almost certain that each and every one of you have thought about this over the last 7 days. And what is that? COVID vaccines. So let's start there, right? So I just quickly, out of curiosity, I put in Google, right? Management consulting, distribute COVID vaccines, just out of curiosity to see what would come up. And my quick search results, my quick Google search led to this results, right? Consulting firm helps me pinpoint vaccine deserts, vaccine management system. There's an article by Deloitte. France hired McKinsey for its COVID vaccine rollout, and you can go on and on. There's like so many results here. So I like this because it's a unique situation, right? You have this need to distribute vaccines across, I want to say, millions of people, right? So one country needs to distribute vaccines to its entire population in the most efficient way possible, right? How do they create a strategy for doing that? How do they prioritize who gets it? How do they prioritize how it's distributed, right? At some point, majority of companies are going to need to work with a consulting firm because it's a complex problem that you don't deal with every day. It's a very unique situation, right? So let's think of a few other unique situations that you might think about. How can we increase graduation rates in our city's public schools? A mayor of a city might come to a consulting firm and say, we are really struggling with graduation rates. We have one of the lowest graduation rates in the country. We don't know what the problem is. Can you help us think about how to improve our education system here? It's a unique problem that would be a great for a consulting company, right? How do we develop our products? How do we develop the products and distribute them to our customers faster, right? That's another interesting situation. What is a long-term strategy for a luxury shoe line? That's one big problem that tons of consulting firms take care of. Strategy questions, just in general, like long-term strategy, short-term strategy of the company, right? In which country should we invest in renewable energy? The list goes on, right? But let's find a way in which we can summarize these types of projects. So when you think of I mentioned previously, right, that clients are dealing with all kinds of complex projects. So one way in which I want us to look at it today is to break down the types of problems our clients face into two buckets. Bucket number one is the industry the client is in, and bucket number two is functional practices. So the industry, it's essentially what you think of, right? If you think of companies like, if you think of technology, high tech, right, what comes to your mind? Google, Apple, right? those kinds of company come to your mind. If you think of public sector, you're just thinking of essentially like government, right? The mayor of the city or a certain county or something like that. If you think financial services, you're thinking the big banks, you're thinking, investment firms, all of that, right? You're thinking, if you think of consumer product goods, it could be anything that you use at home, right? A bowl that you bought, like a kitchen appliance. It could be even just like I have a bottle of water right here. So like just actual bottles, right? And then move over to media and telecommunications. That's an entire industry. So when consultants have a very unique role because you're working across various industries, right? For most consultants, you're not attached to one specific industry. You might find like entry-level consultants might take one project in, say, public sector, and then a couple months down the line, they get the opportunity to do another project in financial services, right? And 6 months down the line, maybe they finish that project and they find themselves doing some oil and gas project, right? And so that's one thing that's very unique about management consulting compared to a lot of other jobs. It's because it gives you the flexibility to jump from project to project across various industries. Let's talk about functional practices. So think of functional practices as how a company is broken down, right? The departments that the company has. So a big company is probably going to have a finance department. It's going to have an organization department that might have HR as part of it. It might have a strategy department. It might have marketing department risk. So this is the types of work that you're doing within the company, right? And so let's take an example of organization. What do you expect a consulting project in that deals with organization to look like? One that I was actually involved in during my time during my time as a consultant was just thinking about culture and change management of a company, right? So one of my clients had a history of um, mergers and acquisition, right? They had already been acquired twice and had another merger, and so in a period of about just a couple of years, they'd gone through so much transition. And the issue then became that people from this individual organizations saw themselves in silos, right? So like company A merges with company B, which merges company C. And so you're finding that each individual, the company is essentially broken down and that people who just see themselves differently. They don't think of themselves as one big unit. They think of themselves as separate units, right? One good example for those of you here in the US that you watch college football would be, so I went to Notre Dame, and one of our biggest rivals in football was University of Michigan, right? And so I always tell people, it's like, think about two schools that are big rivals, and then you decide, you know what, I want University of Notre Dame and I want University of Michigan to be one school, just combine them. But you see, the problem is the University of Michigan would have its own distinct culture. The University of Notre Dame would have its own distinct culture. So if you put them together, you end up having a bit of a conflict there, right? And so that's one type of project that you would see in organization. Another good example is in marketing. So I did another project in marketing that was really interesting. And for this particular client, a client in oil and gas, right? They had so many different products that they're selling to their clients. And they had this tendency to promise clients that they will customize products as per their needs. So a client comes to them to say, I want you to change this product in this particular way. And they say, yeah, sure thing, we'll do it. So instead of having like a set of around 20 products that they sell that are all very profitable, have great margins, they end up having over 500 different products that they're selling because they're always customizing the products to what the clients want. And the problem of doing that is each individual product was not every product was generating good margins, right? So some of the products ended up being they ended up generating losses. And so the overall performance of the business had declined significantly. And they wanted us to help them conduct an analysis to help them determine, it was essentially called a product portfolio optimization project. And the whole goal was to decide, how do we create a portfolio of products that are only profitable and are not complex to create, right? So create simple products that generate tons of money, because that's how you make money as a big organization. That's how you do it. Do things simply that have high return, right? And so you coming in as a consultant. We're going to talk about this a little bit more later, but essentially, like, it's hard to tell you exactly what you will do, because if there's one thing that you might have gathered from what I'm saying, it's there's a lot going on in the world of management consulting, right? There's so many industries, there's so many functional practices. And so what I did is going to be so different than another consultant. Like, I might sit next to my friend who was also working as a consultant, and when we compare notes, we had very different experiences, because when you come in, you have this flexibility to choose projects, and we can talk about that later if you're interested. But so, like, your journey as a consultant can be very different from your friends, right? So, and you have that flexibility to choose. All right, and so let's go a little bit into what exactly you're doing. Okay, so I've said before that you have all these cool projects and you're making impact in different types of way, depending on what project you're doing, which industry you're in, what functional practice you're a part of. But specifically, what exactly are you doing on a day-to-day basis, okay? And I want to think of it in terms of the different stages in your consulting journey. Majority of you on this call, from what I understand, right, you're already professionals, you're already working, or I think 50% of you already have jobs. 25% also have a job, but you want more. 14% are still in school. So I think generally my guess is most of you would come in an entry level consulting position, right? So you, depending on the company, the term that they use will be slightly different. They might use the word business analyst, they might use the word associate, we might use the word junior consultant. This is a part about consulting companies that can be frustrating. They all have different terminology to describe the exact same role. And so you kind of just need to read your target company's role description. But in a nutshell, let's just call them, for the purposes of this presentation, entry-level consultant, right? You come in to a company and you're put in a project. Each project has about around, just depending on the nature of the work, but say 2 to 5 consultants, right? And so if you're coming in as an entry-level consultant, you will be assigned an individual work stream. What that means is that you are in charge of this work stream from the beginning to the end. Let me provide one example, right? During my, so I did an internship at McKinsey before coming in for my full-time. And during the internship, we had a really interesting project where we were essentially helping our client figure out their long-term strategy for improving a specific neighborhood, right? This neighborhood was struggling in various ways. Number one, just in general, safety and security was very low. There's so many issues of crime there. Secondly, health, right? They didn't have many health facilities for their residents. Third, education, didn't have many schools in that area. And just general community was struggling. There wasn't that sense of a community. And so essentially at the beginning of the project, our manager had decided that these are the 8 things that we want to work on over the course of the next few months, right? We want to create a strategy as to how this, our individual client can help this neighborhood improve within this 8 metrics, right? And I was assigned 1 out of those 8 things, right? So that's my role, was that's my work stream. It's one piece out of all of that. And it ended up becoming healthcare. So I was assigned the healthcare work stream. And so that takes us to the next point. So my work was to conduct research, analysis, expert interviews, and summarize findings within my work stream, right? So what this means is, day one, I need to understand, how do I determine whether a community is performing well or poorly across in the healthcare, right? And so I'm conducting research as to what is the best practice of a well-performing, I forget if it was a neighborhood or how exactly we describe that area, but how do we determine that this neighborhood is performing well in healthcare? So I'm looking at benchmarks. What are the cities in the US that are considered, what are neighborhoods in the US that are considered best performing in this metric and whatnot, right? I'm conducting analysis, right? I'm trying to translate the research I'm finding into some kind of Excel analysis. I'm speaking to experts, right? Experts within the firms that you work for, but also just experts in the, it could be experts from your client side. So in our case, we're speaking to people who live in those communities, who are considered as leaders of the community. We're calling people who are consultants who have worked on these types of projects before, to ask them how they went about doing this, right? And I'm summarizing all this information into some kind of a presentation, right? I'm putting together what I think is my best guess as to what the client needs to do, right? And so the thing that's kind of intimidating for a lot of people is you might be coming in right out of college, or maybe you have 3 or 4 years of experience, but you don't have experience in that specific field. And within a few weeks, you're expected to come up with all this recommendations. So it's kind of an intimidating job, but it does push you and it does challenge you to become the best version of yourself so that you can help your clients accomplish their goals. And so then you're presenting your recommendations to the team and the clients. And again, one thing that's really interesting about consulting is entry-level consultants are often put in situations where you're sitting in meetings and leading presentations to C-level executives. Like you'll be in a situation where you're leading a presentation and you're seeing the vice president of one of the product lines for a Fortune 500 company. He's listening to you, right? And you're thinking, I'm just like 20-something-year-old, whatever, right? But that's something that's really interesting. So let's move on to the next category, right? So you've moved on from entry-level consulting role. There's a bit of a bump up for most companies. They have a transition role, which is like senior analyst, senior associate. It just depends on senior consultant, depends on the company, right? And then after that, you go into the manager role and your job changes slightly here. So in the first role, you're managing a work stream, the end-to-end, you're managing a work stream from end to end, but now you're managing the entire project. So a project might have 3 to 4 or 3 to 5 entry-level consultants. As a manager, you are managing those people so that they can run the individual work streams well. So you're essentially a liaison between your entry-level consultants, the partners who are leading the project, and the clients. You're sort of in the middle. So this is quite an interesting role because you have all these pressures coming from all directions. And there's always this running joke that managers are the most trusted people in consulting companies because they have so many people that they need to respond to. But it's a role that really teaches you leadership, and you'll often see a lot of former managers at consulting firms will get a huge bump up when they leave consulting, and they end up, getting, like I mentioned earlier, it ends up being a fast track to executive roles, because if you've managed consulting projects, chances are you can manage a ton of other things in other companies. And also in this role, you're expected to train entry-level consultants. So one of the cool things about consulting is there's a ton of training that you'll go through, whether it's through the project, so day to day, like you're getting training every single day from your manager, but there's also structured training sessions at the end of 1 year and at the end of 2 years and whatnot. And typically this is done by either senior level consultants or managers. And then partners, fun thing. So for those of you who are thinking very long term, you're like, you know what, I might see myself going into consulting and like working my way up to the partner level. What would I do as a partner? And obviously I can only speak from observation because I was not in consulting that long. But from my observation, a majority of the work of partners is bringing in new clients to the firm, right? So they're always finding a way to build relationships with potential clients and bringing them in, and then maintaining that relationship. So that might mean, especially pre-COVID, like traveling to multiple different projects, just so that you have face time with your client, because that's a really good way to build relationships. If there are any issues on the project, the partner is like very serious issues, the partners will come in to deal with those types of issues. You'll often see partners are, they're the ones who are always putting these dinners together for their clients, and, just always finding ways to making sure we're understanding what clients need and we're presenting them with good solutions so that we can have good relationship. Consulting is very much a relationship-based business. It's not the type of business where you're doing ads or social media. It's all just relationship-based. And so that's essentially partners' role, is to maintain those relationships. And then of course they oversee the project. So they're kind of so you think of it as, if a problem is very big, it goes from the analyst to the manager. And then if the manager decides this is a really big problem, they will escalate it to the partner. And then lastly, they leave the firm. Oftentimes partners are having multiple roles. So you might be a partner and you're running consulting engagements, but you're also playing the role of CFO of the company or something like that. So they have to wear multiple hats. So I know I've said a lot, and I think I want to give a little bit of time just for a few questions before I go into the next section. Yeah, so if we have any questions, and Sajid, I'll let you let me know if we have comments in the chat box, because I don't see it. And about what consulting is, I can take this right now.
We have a question here. I'm interested to learn about whether I can pivot from industry into consulting with only a few years of experience. I've been networking with consultants, but I've been told it's difficult to transition into consulting from industry unless I have many years of experience or an MBA. I think this is probably going to be a really good question to address when we start talking about what it actually takes to break into management consulting.
Yes, I have that slide coming up, but yes, what they said in a nutshell. It is a lot tougher for industry hires compared to MBAs. The statistics is significantly higher if you have a top 10 MBA.
Okay, we have a question. What's the ratio from associate to manager to a partner?
The ratio?
Mm-hmm.
So the ratio, that's a really good question. I don't know what the exact ratio will be, but most consulting firms do have some form of, we'll talk about this in quite a bit. Actually, I might just wait and share that slide in just a little bit. But you'll see that the way consulting firms work is they attract many people into entry-level roles because they know a lot of people will leave consulting to go pursue other opportunities. You have a ton of great exit opportunities that we'll talk about in a second. Some people go to MBAs. So you find that you have consultants are coming in and out so fast in the junior level roles, right? And then in the manager role, it's I don't have the exact number for you, but when it gets to the manager and above, that's when it starts to feel very slim, right? So put things into perspective. You might have if you had 50 people coming into consulting right out of college, you can almost assume that 80% will leave to go to MBA program, to try out startups, to work in tech. It's just very common in the consulting industry. But when people come in from these are people coming in from college, but when people come in from MBA or from industry, people who've been working for a few years, I've observed that they tend to stick around longer because they've already decided that consulting is what they want to do long term. Sorry, that's not a specific answer for you, but
No, I'm actually thinking one of the questions that I'm seeing coming up would be the questions that you will be addressing later on. So why don't we actually get into the next step, and then we'll keep these questions, so we'll make sure that we definitely address them for sure.
Okay, so you're already in mind. Yeah, that sounds good. Great. So is consulting for me? Fun question. Yep. How do I know a career in management consulting is for me? So first of all, this is something that's this topic is really important to me because most people I mentioned earlier, they don't really know what consulting is. And to be honest, that's the truth for most jobs. You go into a job out of school without much awareness of what you're doing. So I think what I put here are a few things that you would tend, if you feel like you check the box and all of these things, my guess is that you would enjoy consulting, right? Because this is what consulting entails. So if you find that you enjoy solving complex problems, you're the kind of person you find a tough problem and you're excited to solve it. You have this, you're ready to roll up your sleeves and get to work and solve it versus feeling intimidated, right? And you have the ability to come up with creative solutions to these types of challenges, because oftentimes when you are working on these types of projects, you don't have all the guidance you need, right? You're given, sometimes you can have, you don't have all the data you require to solve something, and yet your client needs it, your manager needs it. And so you have to find creative ways to get to their solution, right? And sometimes as well, you just don't have all the guidance. Like maybe you're put in a project and there are times when you have to quickly learn you have to learn about your client, your industry, and essentially come up with a solution in a very short period of time. So if you're the kind of person that enjoys solving complex problems, I think you would enjoy consulting. Then you're highly analytical and have a knack for numbers. I cannot emphasize this enough. You'll spend a lot of time working on Excel, creating some type of analysis. So if you hate working on Microsoft Excel, if that's just not your cup of tea, I don't imagine that you would like consulting that much unless you do something in consulting that requires less analytical work. So maybe you do implementation projects or something like that. And then you're a great collaborator and enjoy working in team settings. So you spend, this is an industry which is known for tons of meetings. Put things into perspective, we would often have, from what I've heard from most of my friends who are in different consulting firms, and based on my own experiences, you expect that you'll have a check-in and a checkout every day, right? In consulting projects. And in the middle of the day, you can expect to have some type of, and the check-in and checkout is you checking in with your team saying, this is where I'm on the project. These are the issues I'm facing. These are the meetings that I have. So there's that culture of daily communications with your team, right? And then also you can expect that in the middle of the day, you'll have some type of problem solving session. So if a teammate says that they're struggling with a piece of something in their project, like your team comes together and you try to come up with a solution. You try to join heads and come up with a solution together. So there's a lot of FaceTime, and it can go both ways. Maybe you really enjoy working with people, and I think in that case, consulting would be very good for you. But if you're the kind of person you don't want to work with other people, you just want to work in a corner and not see people for the rest of your life, then this would be the exact opposite, right? And then I'd say also having leadership skills and being comfortable managing a project. I think this was really interesting for me coming out of school, because sometimes you feel like you don't know enough to be the person who's calling the shots, right? But there's this expectation that you're comfortable telling people what you should do next. Like maybe you don't know what the actual answer is in your project, but you're comfortable telling people that I think we should spend the next 2 weeks doing this type of research, or I think we should spend this amount of money purchasing this case study online, or I think we should pull in the partner for this meeting, right? So you have that comfort in managing projects. And this is managing projects, this entails managing upwards, right? So as an entry-level consultant, you're expected to also manage your partner, which is kind of a weird thing, because most of us are used to receiving just you're used to your boss telling you what to do, but in consulting it's the other way around. You tell your boss what you need to do, right? If you think of partners as your bosses, we don't really think of partners as bosses in consulting, but if you were to do that, it's the equivalent of telling your boss, we need to be doing this next week, which I think is hilarious. And then you're intellectually curious. I think just in general, people who seem to be intellectually curious will enjoy consulting, because you're always learning something new. Every 2 months, every 3 months, you put in a new project, meaning you're learning about an entirely new industry, entirely new client. So you're learning a lot, and you have clear communication skills, okay? Because you're creating a ton of presentations. You're also just running, in some instances, you're running workshops with big groups of people. So it helps if you know how to speak to foreign audiences. And then fun stuff. So you might be thinking, all right, I check a lot of those boxes. Maybe you don't check all of them, but you check some of them. But you're still on the fence. You're thinking, maybe I want to do finance. I don't know. Maybe consulting's for me. Maybe finance. Maybe I want to do work for an NGO. Why should I choose consulting over this, right? And if I had to summarize what I think are my, what I felt are the 6 biggest benefits that I got from career in consulting, it would be what is on the slide here. So the first one was probably my what I valued the most, specifically because I joined consulting out of school. And so this is, for me, just gaining access to learning and growth opportunities was my biggest benefit. And because you're changing projects so frequently, you're interacting with so many different people, you end up learning a lot. Consulting firms are also known to really value feedback. And so they will give you tons of feedback along your journey. It's not like, I was talking to my husband, and he's a lawyer. And he told me that in his company, he gets feedback. In his previous company, he was only receiving feedback during the semi-annual reviews, right? So once or twice a year, his boss would tell him how he is performing. And it's the exact opposite in management consulting, because here you're receiving feedback typically like every couple of weeks. You're having a conversation with the manager about how you're doing. Because if you think about it, a project is only 2 or 3 months, and your manager wants to make sure that you have a couple of opportunities to receive very detailed feedback as to how you're performing before they submit your performance to the company, right? So the skill set that you gain, I think we've touched on this quite a bit, but you end up getting a very diverse skill set. And the reason this is important is once you leave consulting, because a lot of people leave consulting after a short time, this skill set really comes in handy. And this ties into, I don't think I have it here, but it ties into another benefit, which is the types of exit opportunities that you will receive. So within 2 or 3 years in consulting, you can, even just within a year in consulting, you can expect to start having all these headhunters on LinkedIn reaching out to you and sending you emails about all kinds of opportunities. I still get those emails, even though I left consulting in 2019, but I still get those emails from people saying they're looking for former consultants to join some type of investment firm or some type of PE organization, so PE firm. So they know, recruiters know that you're getting a very diverse skill set in consulting, and so they will offer you opportunities to apply to other roles. Then opportunities to build relationships with senior execs. I had a few friends tell me that they wanted to work in certain industries, and so they were using that time in consulting to build relationships with people who are in C-level roles in different companies, because they had made a plan to like eventually work their way into a C-level role in these types of companies. So it was a long-term strategy, but consulting does give you that benefit. And then mentioned before, competitive salary and benefits, right? They're known for good 401ks, good healthcare benefits, generally across the board, especially the top 10 consulting firms. And we'll talk about them in just a bit. And then just having it on your resume doesn't hurt. Opens up many doors if you have it on your resume. And lastly, the alumni network. This is also another one that I truly, truly appreciate, because now that I run my own business, my network from my school and my first job is what I leverage when trying to create opportunities, right? It's all about who you know in this world. And so it helps to have a strong alumni network. So why do people leave consulting, especially after 2 to 4 years? I put this on a slide because I used to get this question all the time. And the first and probably the most obvious answer is that it's always, for a lot of people, that was always the plan, right? I mentioned right now, I had friends who wanted to become CEOs or CFOs at all these companies. And so they come into consulting with that goal, and that's their goal. And they plan to do consulting for a couple of years and then go to MBA and then get a job somewhere and work their way up the ladder. So that was always a plan for a lot of people. Others leave because they want to attend graduate school. It's very common to see, especially for consultants that come in right out of college, it's very common to see them leave after 2 or 3 years to go to MBAs. And some will even pay for it. That's a fun one, right? A lot of these firms at the top 10 will pay for your MBA, just the entire tuition. And then desirable exit options, right? So you get all these LinkedIn headhunters trying to ask you to apply for all these cool jobs, and you start thinking, you know what? I want to increase my salary, so why not? So a lot of people will go into big tech is quite common, startups. I saw some of my friends left and got chief of staff roles in like startups or in NGOs. It's quite common. But then sometimes you also get a group of people that leave and just do something that just seems so random. It's like, what are you doing? It doesn't make sense. But you'll see that, right? I had a friend who left, one of my former teammates, he left consulting to go do a PhD because he wanted to become the president. So you have those people. We also had someone in our class who was a former, she'd actually been in the Olympics, which was pretty cool. But anyway, so she ended up deciding that she wanted to focus on sports. We have that. Some people decide they want to go to med school and make a difference by becoming a doctor. Great. But yeah, you get all kinds of people. What I think is interesting about consulting is you get all kinds of people coming in. It's not as clear as like other roles that have a very, you have a picture of what an accountant looks like. It's very specific, and you have a picture of what someone in marketing looks like. But in consulting, you get all kinds of people, and when they leave, they all do such random things, and I think it's interesting. But then the negative reasons, and I have to talk about this because I don't want to paint you a picture and then you're like shocked, is the truth is it's a very tough job, right? With big salaries, often you have long hours, and it's just demanding roles. So when you're dealing with client-facing projects, if you're in a client-facing project, you can expect that the workload will be quite heavy. You might have long nights, and it depends on also, what team you get. Some teams are, what team you are, what location. Some locations are known for working harder than others, right? So burnout is quite common. Some people leave because of that. They want better work-life balance. Other people just don't like the work. They're like, I really came into consulting and I like the people I met. I like the company, but I just don't see myself doing Excel and Pop when I don't love it. It's just not me. I'm not an analytical person. I thought I was, but now I know that I'm not. And then there's also up or out culture, but that's more common for people in senior level positions. It's not as common for entry level roles. And essentially what that means is if you're not getting promoted, if you're not getting promoted, you're expected to leave, you're canceled out. And that's probably one of the most negative reasons, because these are people that maybe they want to stay in consulting, but they just don't. It's a competitive environment because everyone is so good, right? You're getting all this top-notch candidates from who've performed well in their entire lives, and this not everyone can become a partner. So some people have to leave. So you get a good mixture of some positive and negative reasons, but in general, this is an industry that is known to have a much higher attrition rate that compared to like other industries where, like an NGO, right? Someone just shows up and they stay there for the next 20 years. You don't see that in consulting. People come in and out so frequently. Oh, great. So that brings me to my story. I think I don't think I mentioned this before, but yeah, so I'll go through this quickly because we have 18 minutes left. So I joined consulting. I joined consulting as an intern when I was at Notre Dame, and then ended up going as a full-time hire. And the reason I joined consulting was because I spoke to a mentor and I said to him that I really wanted to run my company someday. And I asked him what I should do. This was back when I was a sophomore or freshman in college. I don't remember. And I just asked him what he wanted to do. I said, I want to be in business long-term. What should I do? And he said to me, well, when you say business, do you mean investment or do you mean running a company? And I said to him, well, I want to run a company someday. That's my goal. And he said, well, if you want to run a company, you should probably go into consulting. So I had heard from him and I'd heard from a few other mentors that if you want to run a company, you should go into consulting. So that's what I did. So I worked there 2 years, and then during my time in consulting, I had a really interesting revelation, something that I wouldn't have expected. And I realized that I just really like helping people, like in general coaching. And so I enjoyed the aspect of consulting that involved meeting my clients and having meetings with my clients and my teammates. And I was the kind of person that would get to know everyone on the project, but I didn't feel as connected to the work as I thought I would, right? So I was more connected to the people aspect of the role. And I had the chance to do all this recruiting. I was helping the recruiting teams quite a bit, right? Going to all the schools, talking to students about consulting. And I ended up liking that so much. And so initially I thought, you know what, I'm gonna try to take, when everyone's leaving after 2 years to go do the MBAs, maybe I'll just take a bit of time off and start a company where I help people get jobs, because I really enjoyed coaching people as sort of a side gig. I wasn't paid to do it. It's just something I did on the side. So that's how I ended up starting this company. And initially it was something that I just did out of passion. And then I started getting a lot of clients and people kept wanting my help. And so I ended up sticking with it, and here we are. But in the process of doing this, I've met a lot of cool people. So for instance, I met like with Ugo, right? He ended up getting a role into consulting, but I had a great time coaching him on how to do case interviews. And then he ended up introducing me to his roommate as well. And he was like, well, he also needs to apply. And he ended up getting 3 offers to all the top MBBs. And we'll talk about that, right? Helped another one of my clients as well who needed help in thinking about how to break into consulting. How do I craft my resume? What is it that I'm expected to do? And just I've met so many people in this journey, and it's just been really fun, right? And so another one is this amazing client that I had who ended up getting into Bing. And his story is very unique because when he showed up, he just knew very little about consulting. He didn't know anything about consulting interviews. And so we worked together to really teach him. And he was also based in Saudi Arabia. So we had a very interesting time difference at the time, right? I had another client who showed up to me 2 days before her interview with EY, and she's engineering student, very smart, but just never had any business background and just very basic business terminology. She was really struggling with it, and she was quite nervous. And with just 2 days, I was able to coach her. And she reached out to me recently to tell me that she got an offer. So that was really good. But yeah, so I meet a lot of cool people, and I help them on this journey to consulting. And I hope that I can also help you. So more results here. Oh, and then one last thing too, I have people who show up to me and they don't actually want to go into consulting. They just say, I just want your help with interview coaching. Can you do that? And I've also had the chance to help like people get into an MBA program, just leveraging the skills in communication, but using that for MBA interviews. Okay, one more set of questions and then we'll do the last one.
Okay, we actually do have a lot of questions, and just looking at them, some of them we will be addressing. One person was asking, what's the work-life balance? And you kind of addressed this a little bit. And the question somewhat relates to what's the difference between the different MBB firms. And I think you're going to talk about that as well, right? So what we'll probably do is, there are a couple of questions here that relate to work-life balance. So
Ooh.
would you mind talking about the work-life balance and the difference in the work-life balance? And then I do promise that we are going to address all of the questions that you asked. So don't worry, we'll stick around as long as we need to, even if we're here till 10 o'clock. We're going to be here till 10 o'clock, right, Olivia? And we'll
Yeah.
answer all of your questions. But can we talk about work-life balance and then we'll get into talking about the different firms, and then of course we'll talk about how do you break in.
Yeah, absolutely. So work-life balance is really interesting because it varies so much based on the company you're working with and also based on the types of projects you're in. So there's two types of projects. Okay, I've said there's many types of projects, but let's break it down into two types of projects. Like project one is you have a client, right? Client-facing projects. Project two, you're having an internal project. My experience, internal projects where you don't have clients have very, very what they have good work-life balance, right? Because the reason why consultants don't have are not typically don't have work-life balance is because of the pressures they're getting from clients. So you end up on internal projects or you end up on like a social sector project, work-life balance becomes really good. If you end up in a project that's like dealing in finance industry or something like, or a project where your company is going through bankruptcy, right? Your client is going through bankruptcy or a merger and acquisition, those types of projects are known to not have work-life balance, right? So the reason I can't give you an exact number and tell you you work this number of hours is because it varies based on, are you working for a boutique, like a smaller consulting firm, or are you working for a big firm and you end up on like a due diligence project? So it can vary significantly, right? So in general, I would say though, expect that I had a slide here about typical workday and I ended up taking it out because of time, but you can expect that you will check in, check in with your team around like 8:45 a.m. for like your morning check-in, and you typically have an evening checkout where you again discuss what needs to get done before the end of the day, and that's usually at 6 p.m. And so you have a bit of time to like get food, go to the gym. But if you're working on those intense projects where it's like I mentioned, like your client is really going through a rough patch and you're trying to help them fix something in the short period of time, then you're probably working into that it's common to hear consultants saying they're working till midnight. It just depends on like what project they're on, or till like it's sometimes they will say till 8 p.m., 10 p.m., whatever. It also just depends on the person, because some consultants will say no matter how much work I have, I'm going to go home at 6 p.m. and they find a way to make it work, right? So it's an industry that work-life balance just varies so much based on the actual person, like how efficient you are and the client that you're working with, your partner, and just the general project, like what type of project it is.
Okay, perfect. And Lisa was actually asking, is 40 plus hours a week work always expected? And I think we would probably say that 40 hours would be a huge understatement when it comes to management consulting careers.
That's
So
a great week. That's a great week. Yeah.
yes, exactly. That's a very short week with probably lots of holidays. All right, well, let's talk about how do we actually break into management consulting. And then, like I mentioned, we'll definitely be addressing all your questions. So thanks for putting the questions in the chat box and the Q&A box. We're going to go through all of them. But just in the interest of time, let's talk about how to actually break into management consulting.
Excellent. So first question for you, if you want to break in, you have to decide what company you want to work in. I mentioned earlier, consulting is a big industry, so many great firms. So I'll go through 2 slides on this topic, right? First slide is, a lot of people when they think of consulting, they think of one of the companies here. This is some of the most well-known companies. I threw in Accenture, but I put it in the next slide as well. And so one common term that you'll hear is MBB, right? People will say MBB. It just means McKinsey, Bain, BCG, and they're just known as they're very hard to get in, and that's what they're known for. It's very hard to get into MBB firms. and they're just pure consulting, pure strategy, just pure consulting firms. Though a lot of them they've started to now expand into implementation type projects like digital. They've started to expand quite a bit, but for a long time they were just known for like pure consulting, right? And then you'll hear people talk about Big Four, and these were essentially accounting and like tax and audit firms that ended up opening advisory practices. And so they're also really big companies in most, at least Deloitte is in most countries, NEY are seem to be in most countries. So they're really big companies. To put things into perspective, like you're expecting the companies we're looking at this slide to have over like, you know, over 40,000 employees. Like, so that's why that's why I'm saying they're really big companies, right? And there's tons of projects that you can work on. And then there are other firms that don't really have a perfect, like they don't have a perfect acronym for them, but they're also really good companies that people like to talk about, like LK Consulting. And so yeah, so this is a good landscape of strategy and management focus companies. And with the first slide, in those types of companies, you can expect to do a wide range of projects. And then there's a certain types, there are other consulting firms that tend to have a more sector specific focus. So they're known, doesn't mean that that's all they do. It just means that that's what they're known for, right? Like, let's look at the healthcare space. Huron and Healthscape are known as being healthcare consulting firm industry leaders. In the public sector space, Booz Allen Hamilton and Dalbag are known as being public sector consulting industry leaders. Technology, Accenture is there, IBM. I'm sure there's a lot more that I've left out, right? So if you're thinking, I want to go into consulting, the first thing you have to decide is like, what kind of work do you do? Do you care about the industry that you're in? And if you do care about the industry that you're in, then you want to Google that particular industry and then add consulting, right? So for instance, you say, I want to do HR consulting. So you type in HR consulting and see what comes up. You say you want to do technology consulting. So you do technology consulting. But if you just want to go into general consulting because you want the lifestyle that I described before, which is you jump from project to project. Today you're you're working for a bank, and then 3 months from now you're working for a hospital. If that's what you really want, then you probably just want to look at the general strategy consulting firms. Yeah, and so this is what a consulting process would typically look like. I say typically because there are so many consulting firms, right? So it's hard for me to just tell you exactly what it is. There's so many consulting firms. Each location has its own unique process and timeline and acceptance rates. It's all different. But if I had to just summarize, I give you my best guess, I'd say what I tend to see a lot is that most consulting firms will have the application phase. And this is the hardest phase, right? This is where you see the lowest success rate. So someone had asked this previously, and they said, is it easier to get in from industry or is it easier to get in from MBA? The short answer is it's easier to get in from MBA. So you only see about 5% success rate for industry hires. But if you attend one of the top 10, top 25 MBAs, the success rate ends up from the application to the round one, right? It ends up being around 30%, right? And so essentially, again, like you might be a strong candidate. So if you're a strong candidate, I still recommend that you apply from industry because you're saving all the money you'd spend in an MBA. But then if you feel like you're not a strong candidate and maybe you don't want to go right now into consulting and you want to go into MBA, then the benefit of doing that is that you have a higher success rate. So it kind of just depends, like your decision should be dependent on your specific situation, right? So application phase, simple resume, cover letter. Sometimes you will have other companies will add other things, like they might say you had a phone chat with HR or a standardized test, but basically the resume tends to be the most important thing. That's it, the resume alone. And then with round one, so there's essentially 2 to 3 rounds of interviews depending on your company. And what you can expect is to do a combination of case interviews and fit interviews. I think we're running out of time, but I'll just quickly talk about case interview in the next slide. So you can just expect that you're doing a business problem in the case interview and you're going through some types of behavioral question in the fit interviews, right? The difference between round one and round two tends to be the people who are interviewing you. Round one tends to be more junior consultants. Round two tends to be more senior consultants, right? Maybe even partners. And then sometimes round two or round three for different companies might have a group case study. So for the most part, interviews are individual, but you might have a group case study in round two or round three, right? And then success rates for round one, again, still pretty low, could be 10 to 20, around that range. It could be higher, lower, right? Just depends on the company, how big it is, how selective it is, how many people applied. And then in round two, the acceptance rates tend to get higher. And that's just because they've already filtered out all the weak candidates, okay? So the best way to really understand what this process looks like is to look at your target role and target company and target location, and you'll see that they have the exact information listed for that in the website. Yeah, and then last comment too is a lot of the success rates is based on the top consulting firms. So if you're applying to smaller firms, right, boutique consulting firms, it's probably going to be a lot higher. So it just depends on what you're aiming for. Yeah, and I mentioned this before, but a case interview, most people don't really know what that is. So I'll just say, I mean, I usually spend a lot of time coaching people in case interviews, but the short answer is think of this as a real life business problem condensed into a 25-minute interview, right? So they take an actual business problem that somebody would face. Like for instance, a client is struggling with declining profitability. How can we address that? That's a real life business problem, condense it into 25 minutes. And so during that period of time, you're discussing your approach to solving this problem, and they're testing your ability to structure the problem, right? How do you create a structure to solve your problem? They're testing your analytical skills through the math. They typically give you simple math, but it's tricky. So like if you practice and you've done a ton of case interviews, you know how to solve it. But if you've never done this before, it tends to be, some people might feel like it's a bit difficult, right? Test your ability to generate great insights throughout the case, connect the dots between different parts of the interview, and then lastly, communicating like a consultant. Like, can you convince your client to make a certain decision? Behavioral interviews, in a nutshell, behavioral interviews, they're testing to see if you have the soft skills that are required for you to excel as a consultant. They want to see that you're a top performer. You know, you're always somebody who's doing great work. They want to see that you use logic to solve problems and make decisions. And lastly, they want to show that you bring value to every team and project, right? And I know this all might seem very like complicated, like how do I do that? But that's kind of what I do. I help people figure out how do they communicate their value throughout the behavioral interviews, and how do I show that I have a structured problem-solving approach during case interviews, right? So that's what I do as an interview coach, right? And all right, so I think this is a part where I'm gonna pass it on to you, but in a nutshell, we are working together to create this program, and the goal is to help you land your dream job. And so I will pass it on to you to talk more about the program. So.
Thanks, Olivia. And maybe I'm going to tell a personal story. And the reason why we started working together with Olivia is when I did my MBA a number of years ago, I was actually, I chose an MBA program based on convenience and the price and something that I felt like I'm going to have a good experience. And then throughout the program, I discovered that I really would love, I didn't really know much about management consulting, but I've discovered that this would be a really interesting career for me to go to. So I went to my school and I said, can you guys help me out? Can you help me break into management consulting? And unfortunately, and I went to one of the top schools in Canada, and you can check my LinkedIn profile where exactly I went. Essentially the career center said, look, you basically apply. These companies don't come and hire on campus at our school. So you have a good profile. So why don't you send in your application and off you go? So I did. I actually sent in my application to Bain, BCG, and McKinsey, and the Big Four as well. So I sent it to all of them. And surprisingly to me, I got a call from Bain and Company. And they spoke with me on the phone for a few minutes and then invited me for an interview. So I did go for the first round of interview, and they gave me a case. I still remember the case was a golf club was trying to decide if it's worth it retrieving used golf balls from their property, and whether that's going to help them make money or improve the experience. And so I had to talk about what does it actually mean? I had to talk about the club's reputation, how it's going to affect their operations, and how much money they might possibly make. So they gave me a couple of cases, and they probably liked me because I did make it to the last round of interviews with the partners. There were 10 people. We first got invited for a dinner at a really nice restaurant. There was a night before, and then the next morning we got invited to the office, and we all were interviewed. There was another business case, or a couple of business cases. Actually, I had an interview with a manager at that time, and then a partner. And what's interesting is I actually met that manager afterwards. So he was a guy who just literally, so he was a consultant there. He went to do his MBA at INSEAD, and he just came back. And he was interviewing me literally. I think he was there for like 6 months or so. And then I interviewed with a partner. And the other people actually who were interviewing with me, they were a couple of people from University of Toronto. There were a couple of people from Ivy, Western University, and everybody else was from top US schools. And I think there were like a few people from Harvard, like maybe two or three, and there were a couple of people from some other top schools. So long story short, unfortunately, I did not make it, and I wasn't hired at Bain, which was really heartbreaking for me. That's why, and I'm sometimes telling this story when we're talking about getting into a business school and how it's so important to get into the right business school. And when we started chatting with Olivia and I shared my story, we said, well, look, you should have actually reapplied, or there was actually a way for you to get prepared, because I did really well in a case interview. Where things didn't go right quite well for me was at the behavioral level, right? So unfortunately, I didn't make it, and and then there's the twist to that story is that I did get a job with a big telecommunications firm in Canada, and I was hired as a senior manager. And then about 3 years later, 3 or 4 years later, the guy who was interviewing me, the manager from Bain, got hired as a director. So he got hired basically on the level above me right away. And he was just maybe a year or two older than me. And then again, I was a senior manager. And then as I was continuing to be senior manager, I worked for that company for 9 years. And I was hired as a senior manager, and I left as a senior manager. But this guy, after 2 years of being a director, being in his mid 30s, he was promoted to a VP level. So you can imagine being for a company for just 2 years, he's already a VP. So what an amazing track. And I had a chance to interact with him a little bit. And this talks a lot about the sorts of opportunities that are available. And I was really looking back now, this career that I'm doing right now, helping people get into business school and have amazing careers, what we do at Admit Master. I have no regrets, but at some point I did have big regrets of not getting into management consulting, because my career probably would have shaped differently, or I would have had a much, you know, maybe a much nicer mansion or a bigger car. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, what you said is so interesting, just because yeah, it's insane. I'll be honest with you, it's insane the kinds of opportunities that people get, because I have a lot of friends in consulting, right? And I see it on LinkedIn, just people making the updates. Most of my friends went to work in all this top went to all these top MBAs. They all got into just Wharton, Harvard, Stanford. They make it look like, it's not that hard if you've gone through all these top consulting companies. But on top of that, I've definitely seen the promotions as well. Like when I was leaving my job, um, I remember like reaching out to someone because I was very interested in the startup world at the time, tech, and I was just, curious to see what's out there. And it's just insane how many people opened doors for me. I was getting opportunities to talk to people who worked in all the big tech firms in the West Coast, right? So, and there was a company that was growing so fast at the time, and they essentially said they were exclusively hiring consultants for all this like business development roles. And essentially, just by virtue of being a consultant, you're getting invited to interview, and the goal is that within 2 years you're getting promoted to all these managerial roles, because it's a startup that's going to grow really quickly. And so I did see this firsthand. It's truly a fast track to executive roles. I did see that. I've seen that with a lot of my friends. Even one of my good friends was promoted from he came out of college, and within a year and a few months he made it to manager, right, in a consulting firm, which is kind of insane. So you do see that. I think that's probably, if you already know that you want to work in business roles, that would probably be one of the biggest benefit that you would get. Of course, we did talk a lot about with that big benefit, there's a lot of hard work, right? So it's kind of like just it depends on the type of person you are. But if that's what you're looking for, to Serge's point, like you want to get promoted to an executive role, then it's not a bad place to start. Oh, great. Give me a second.
Exactly. And because this is really where a lot of, even many of the schools wouldn't necessarily, like my school didn't really prepare me for applying to the consulting firms. So that's why we've decided to put together this program. Olivia, I think there's
All right. Were you able
finding.
to see it? I try to give you access.
No, 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 that's fine. You just click. So
Okay.
what we've decided to put together is we said, okay, so had I worked with Olivia before, had I had access to this sort of coaching in the past, I would have been much further ahead, and my life would have been very different. So that's why we decided to put together this program to help you break into management consulting. So Olivia, I'll let you control the slide because that's hard for me to do it. So it's basically a program that we've put together, and it's normally $2,000, but just for this webinar, it's going to be $1,000 Canadian. If you are joining from the United States, it's going to be $7.99 US. So you're basically getting it about 80 cents on a dollar. And here's what we're going to do. We're actually going to record this program, and it's going to become a program that's going to be available as the pre-recorded format. But the way we're going to record it, we're going to have a live class only for the first 20 people. So you're going to have a chance to interact a lot. You're going to have a lot of chance to interact with each other as well as with Olivia as she's sharing a lot of these insights with you. And we're going to do classes. So the classes are going to be on behavioral interviews, on case interviews. They're going to be on how do you actually prepare your application. So you're going to understand really well this whole process. So just this one time, and we're going to start this program at the end of April. Just this one time, it's going to be a live class, and it's going to be the same price and potentially higher, but for video classes later. You are going to have some one-on-one time. So as you know, if you worked with Admit Master, we're really big on individual coaching. So you're going to have a strategy session with Olivia. You're going to go through your profile. You understand, is this the right career for you? You're going to work on your resume as well. And you have access to all of the classes for a year. And of course, this is going to really help take your careers to the next level. So this is a package where you can come in and really at the end of this, you're going to be ready to apply to these consulting firms. You're going to have a really good resume. You're going to have the right strategy, and you understand what is the coaching process as well. And then after this, you have a couple of options. Now, option number one is if you are already applying to consulting, then there's a package that will additionally include behavioral prep interview sessions, as well as mock interview. So the mock interview, again, Olivia is going to teach you how to go through the mock interview, and then you're going to go and do a lot of mock cases, a lot of cases by yourself. And then there's also a package for some of the people who are saying, look, I'm already applying, I'm really super serious, and I just need the most help that I can get. So that package, in addition to your classes and the strategy session and the resume review, it will also include the behavioral interview, but more mock case interviews. And it will also include work on your LinkedIn, as well as access to a lot of materials. So with this package, you don't actually need to go and get any of these materials. We are going to include them for you. So you have the business cases, you have the math drills, you have the business drills, and you have a lot more of these sessions where you're going to do the mock interviews and the LinkedIn. A lot of this is now at this point is done one-on-one. So this is the program. Now, if you are interested, and really, if you are just exploring, you're thinking it would be nice to get into management consulting, then the starter package, which we call the student package, is the package where you are getting a lot of insights about how the industry works, career coaching. And you know, usually to work with a career coach, it's anywhere from $300, and we've seen up to $1,000 an hour to work with a career coach is going to help you with your resume and just understand where do you really take your career. So this is more of an exploratory package. And if you're really serious and if you do really want to have the best shot of getting into consulting firms, then you can choose these other packages as well. Even if you end up not going into consulting firms, what you're getting with this class, with what we call the student package, you can use it in any sort of a career, not just management consulting. Now, management consulting is one of the hardest industries to get into. That's why if you get trained for a marathon, you can run 5K. That's how we look at it, right? So it's going to be really just a way to, in a very, very practical terms, work on presenting yourself the best possible way for these interviews. We can go to the next slide.
I was gonna just, yeah, so I was gonna comment on what you said, which is, I think some of you in this who are sitting and listening to this presentation have already decided that you want to go into consulting in which case, like, yeah, one of the starter package, VIP package makes sense. And then some of you are sitting here and you still want to learn a little bit more. You haven't 100% decided. So for those of you, I think one of the benefits that I've heard from my clients is they say to me that this is essentially, you're essentially teaching me how to speak like a consultant, right? A lot of what I teach them with how to approach case interviews ends up being relevant just in general communications. Like one of the things that I witnessed when I was working with clients is that a lot of clients admired how consultants speak and they wanted to learn how to speak in that way. And case interviews essentially teaches you how to do that. So I think it's definitely a program that helps you break into consulting, but in some ways there's another benefit about just general communication that people tend to value, right? And I did show this slide to one of my current clients just to get his feedback, and because he's worked with me for quite a while. And I think one of the things that he said that was really interesting is you can try to kind of, if you're really serious about going into consulting, you can try and go figure out how to do it on your own, maybe convince one of your friends to give you a practice session here and there, but you end up being so lost in the process because there's so much going on and everyone tells you different things. And so the way to do it is to really work with at least what a lot of professionals who are serious about breaking into the industry, what they do is try to find a coach who actually knows what they're doing so that you end up reducing the amount of time that you're putting in and making sure you're getting the biggest value, right? So people always ask me, like, how many cases do you think I need to do before my interview? And I said to them, well, first of all, it's not about how many cases you should do. Like I talked about my client who showed up to me 2 days before her interview, has never done a case in her life, does not have a business background. She's an engineering student, right? And we were able to get her an offer, right? And she reached out to me recently to say, in addition to her offer from EY, she's gotten a few other offers. And her interviewer stopped her in the middle of a response to tell her that she had the most thought out answer she's ever heard. Now, this is just to say that there's a difference between just like trying to reach out to a few friends and saying, hey, can you teach me what consulting is, versus going through a structured program, because you are getting the best value. You're getting very targeted feedback on what you need to work on, and it's very individualized.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And I actually wanted to show, if we could go to the next slide.
Oh, I thought that
Just
was,
wanted,
oh, we do have another slide. Okay, I forgot about
okay.
that.
So if this is what you'd like to do, if you are really serious, then you can go on this website, consulting.admitmaster.com. It's going to take you directly to that registration page. Like I said, we are going to continue running these classes. So going forward, there will be classes. You can join these classes at any time of the year. Just this first one time, it's going to be a live class. And then going forward, they're going to be video classes where you're going to have a chance to interact with Olivia one-on-one and do a lot of work one-on-one and to really get prepared for a case interview. So you can join anytime when you're ready. But if you'd like to be in a live class, and I think there's a benefit. I love live classes, and if any of you been in our live classes, you know they're a lot of fun and there's a lot of interaction as well. Then take advantage of this opportunity, because this is really going to be for us to record these classes and to make this program.
Yeah, absolutely. So any more questions for us?
So we have quite a few questions. So you can go on this website. It's already up right now, but we have a lot of questions. So if we were to kind of group these questions, we talked about the work-life balance. Let's talk a little bit about the experience that's required to get into management consulting. We have a couple of questions here about, like, do I need many years of experience, or can you have way too many years of experience, like 6 to 8 years pre-MBA? What's the ideal years of experience? Is there too little or too much?
Yes. So the answer is, if you don't have experience, like for those of you who are sitting here and you're maybe college students, you don't really have much work experience, then you apply to the generalist roles, like the entry level roles, because they don't require you to have experience, right? They take people from different backgrounds. But if you feel like you have a lot of experience in a specific industry, you can leverage that to your benefit. And so you can specifically try to network with people in that industry. So for instance, you've worked in healthcare for 7 years, right? If you're trying to break into consulting, you would want to leverage the experience that you already have and network with people who are doing healthcare consulting. And so that becomes a good selling point. You're a content expert in that area. And so they would bring you in, and the differences in the kind of titles that you might be seeing, because there are some roles that it's just more generalist, but you might be applying for like an expat track. And so that's what I'd say to you. If you feel like you have a lot of experience, you probably want to be looking at an expat track.
Perfect.
But yeah, but you don't get disqualified for having too much or too little. It just means you need to reposition you need to make sure you're applying to the right positions.
There are a couple of things included in our contact information. So if you can click on the slide just so we can bring everything up, just in case anybody wants to get in touch with us personally and with you. But I also wanted to mention when it comes to management consulting, just like it's perhaps to a lesser degree with business schools, but it's also very similar with the business schools, is the you do have multiple shots, but if you apply and let's say don't make a really good impression, then your chance of potentially getting in the future are going to be severely limited. So that's why you do really need to be very well prepared. And it's not something that sometimes I would hear from from some people I speak with, they're saying, I'm going to try to apply to McKinsey. And my answer is usually, please don't try, because you have to really take it seriously. There is no try. If you remember the quote from Yoda, right, in Star Wars, you do or you do not. This is a very serious business. If you're going to be working with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, sometimes with CEOs, so you do really need to present yourself as a person who can handle this sort of a work. And simply trying, usually that wouldn't even take us to the first level. We do need to be very serious. We need to be well prepared. You kind of like, if you're playing poker, you kind of like going all in. Though of course you have a backup plan, but many people are also going from that approach. And that's why if you're thinking of doing this, you do really need to be extremely well prepared, because these companies take notes.
Absolutely. So to your point, so I did give the example of my one client who got in after like a few days, but I want to clarify that that was a very exceptional story. It is not the norm. That was the exception, right? Typically people prepare for this like months before. And so yes, to your point, so you don't just show up. And the instances, like I had a client reach out to me and she said, well, I have my interview in a week. I'm so busy with my current job. I don't have any time to prepare. Do you think that I should go on and do this interview, or do you think I should wait and tell them that I want to do it in 6 months? When I heard her describe how busy she was, and I could tell she wasn't going to make this a priority, I told her I would rather you pushed it back, because it sounds like you're going to go into this interview with absolutely no preparation. And we've run a session together, and I don't think you're at the level where you should be. You would have passed. Like she hadn't got it, and she didn't have the time to prepare. So I told her to push it so that she has a good first impression, right? So there are instances where you get to the final round and you end up not getting in, but because you've made it to the final round, you've obviously made a good enough impression that they'll ask you to come back and reapply. But if you come in like your resume, if you're applying and your resume is so bad or your interview is so bad and you just have a very negative impression, like to your point, like that will be the first impression they have of you. So you almost want to take time to figure out how to present, like what's your personal brand, and make sure you're working on your communication skills before showing up.
Yeah, and exactly, and that's why with the program that we're offering, one of the things that you're going to discover is that at the end of the program, you might say, "This is not for me," but I've learned so much about me. I've learned so much about where I want to take my career that now I have a clear direction, and that direction is not towards management consulting. And to me, that sounds like really an amazing outcome, right? And very often when we talk about return on investment, we talk about the cost of MBA. So if you go to, let's say, a top MBA program, it's very often you would, let's say, be paying close to about $200,000 for an MBA program. And the MBA program consists of 20 courses. So 2 years is 10 courses, 5 courses a term, 2 terms, so 20 courses. So each course you take in your MBA program is $10,000. And to me, when I was in my MBA program, I was not necessarily taught how to speak with recruiters. I had a lot of networking. There were some seminars and workshops, but what I found is that a lot of the seminars and workshops were taught by professors who didn't work a day in their life in the business. They were amazing professors that taught me a lot of great things, and I love some of them, still keep in touch. But when it comes to actually getting job, like in a management consulting, that's not necessarily going to learn in school. right? And but some of you might be thinking, okay, MBA is a really good way of getting in. And in fact, there are a couple of questions related to that. There was a question from Nurhan. I'm thinking about MBA or Masters of Management Analytics to become a consultant in the top 10 companies. What should I choose? Um, I'll let you answer it. My answer is usually the MBA/consulting style. It depends, but I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, that's a really good one. So here's the quick difference that I'm hearing is if your master's is gonna be, so your what role you end up applying to will be dependent on what track you choose, because MBAs, for most consulting firms, they will put you on the, again, I said the names, it can get confusing because they use different names, but they will put you at the associate track, or it might considered like, it's essentially, there's a post MBA consulting role. I mean, McKinsey, they call it associate track, but in the other companies, they had a different name for it. If you're applying for a 1-year master's, which is what I think you described, you would be applying for an analyst track, right? So that's kind of the big difference there. Um, in terms of chances of getting in, I think like it depends. What's most important is the name of the program. So you want to make sure you're applying to a well-named, a good brand. I don't think in definitely, I think MBAs have benefits for sure over a master's, and at least from the perception of just people perceive them in a high regard. But what's most important is the brand, right? The brand of the school that you're going to. That's the biggest. That's going to be the biggest determinant for you. It's if you want to get into a top 10 consulting firm, then you're also wanting to make sure if you do an MBA, then it's like a top 25 MBA.
And the reason for that, of course, is that the school does a lot of selection. They do a lot of legwork. So
Yeah.
if you're getting into a top MBA program, that means you already are a really good candidate. And that's what I've actually discovered. I personally, when I went through that Bain interview, I didn't feel like I handled the behavioral part really well. I didn't really know what to expect. However, one of the things that I've heard that I networked and I met somebody who actually worked for that company after one of the top US schools, even though there was an office in Toronto. And he basically told me that to the best of his knowledge, I was the last person from my school who was ever interviewed at that company at Bain. It's basically saying they have a policy now. They only interview people from certain specific schools, and they would not interview, no matter how brilliant. I mean, my resume looked amazing, and I had a 750 of GMAT, and I did the case interviews really well, but they would not give an opportunity to somebody from my school anymore. Um, so he was
Yeah.
actually really surprised because he joined after me, so he was really surprised I even had that opportunity to interview. So it is important, and Syed was asking, it's really important to have education from top university to break into consultancy. Also, what if you have a very niche experience like of a design engineer? And I think Olivia kind of touched upon this, that there are different consulting firms, and for certain consulting firms that are specifically consult in the industry where you're working, Syed, right now, you might be able to get in without an education from top university. But education from top university, an MBA from a top university, is going to get you into a different track, more of a shortcut to get into management consulting, because you essentially passed the first level of screening
Yeah.
by going to an MBA program. Okay? Make sense?
And yeah, to add to that, I mean, I always talk to people about coming up with a networking strategy, but the general advice is if you're applying from um, a smaller program, then there's a bit more emphasis on networking, right? So to your point, companies have like their target schools. That's the actual term they use, and so they show up on campus. They teach you about consulting. They want you to apply. They have specific slots for students. And then if you are from, which is why I said to the earlier student, you should prioritize getting a certain brand name, because chances are that school would be considered a target school, right? And so consulting firms are coming to your school. But if you're from a smaller program, they might not be actively coming to your school. So the onus is on you as an individual to go to them. So like I went to Notre Dame and I got really lucky because the year that I was applying, I think a few years before I applied, it officially became a target school, right? A few years before it wasn't a target school. So like it would have been really hard to apply without being a target school. So the timing worked out really well. But for a student who's applying from a non-target school, if you're applying from industry, then you put a lot more emphasis into networking just to make sure that you're actually getting opportunities to, share your resume with somebody who will actually look at it, right? Yeah, so that's a big difference there.
Yeah. There was actually kind of a related question here. How do I break into consulting without the business background? And if we talk about more of a management consulting, because there are all kinds of different consulting. For example, Dina was asking which companies consult in media and entertainment. And I don't know if you can answer this question or you would give a suggestion to Dina how she can do her research. I'll let you answer that. And then what about, again, question from Gautam, how do I break into consulting without the business background? So what's your take on
So
this?
all the big firms have, most of them at least have media and entertainment. So to put things into perspective, the big consulting firms, they pretty much do everything. Like they're just really big organizations. They have, and so it ends up becoming a location thing. So like if you're based in, so let's talk about stereotypes, right? West Coast is known for technology. It's also known for media and entertainment, right? So if you're working at a consulting firm, it's based on the West Coast. I'm talking about the US. Sorry, I keep forgetting. We have a very, very international group here. West Coast US is known for technology and media. And so like, if that's what you're interested in, you're probably like going to be looking at companies that are based in that area, right? If you're more interested in finance and you want to be a consultant at banks or whatever, then of course you're looking at the East Coast, you're looking at New York, you're looking at that area, right? I can continue going into how those regions are, but at the end of the day, for the big consulting firms that we looked at in that first slide, they pretty much do it all. You just have to be making sure you're looking at the right regions. And then the second question is about getting into consulting without a business background. So the fun thing is consulting actually loves non-business applicants. I was a minority with because I had a business background and I was a minority and people I had a team in which I was the only person with a business degree. Everyone else was an engineer or like some fancy thing. And so yeah, they all look down at us business students. This is a joke, okay? They don't look. No one looks down on you as a business student. It's just a joke. But in my college where I went at Notre Dame, people used to make fun of us business students. So yes, it is not. It does not work against you to not have a business background. If anything, I think it works for you. And it's just all about the trick is just how you communicate your story in your resume. That's why I see people struggling. No one holds it against you for not having a business background, but I tend to see that people who don't have a business background don't know how to write resumes for consulting firms. They also don't know how to prepare for interviews just because like you don't know what business people care about. So it's more about you making sure you're communicating your results in a way that makes sense to somebody who's, how do you show that you're a top performer if you haven't done the types of internships that a lot of business students have done, right? No one expects you to have done a business. So this is assuming you're applying a few just out of college. The same thing, if you've had a few years of experience, how do you communicate that you're a top performer and you've done great work? If it's in an industry that the average consultant who's looking at your resume, they read it and they might not understand it because it's so foreign. And that's kind of where I come in and I help people to create that bridge between all the cool things you've done, but communicating it in a way that makes sense to your resume screener.
Okay, perfect. There are some questions about the interview process. There was the question from Sarah, are the tips only referring to MBB or the Big Four as well? I see many MBA students from less reputable MBA programs in Canada joining the Big Four. I can maybe say from my perspective, again, working with a lot of our clients, the Big Four companies hire a lot more. At least here in Canada. I mean, if you look at the Deloitte's office, it's a huge building downtown Toronto. So they do hire of a lot of people from the MBA programs for sure. Perhaps Olivia, what could you maybe
What
add
was
to that?
the first part of your question? I don't know if I caught
The
it.
question was that are the tips the tips that you're providing about the target schools, do they mostly refer to MBB or what if
Oh,
somebody wants to work for the Big Four? Is that
right.
that
Yeah.
still apply going to a top tier school?
Right. So in general, I think it applies to most consulting firms. The only difference is, of course, the standards are they're not as selective, right? So it's just more a similar story for like Notre Dame. To put things in perspective, a lot of the like MBB firms would only hire, at least in my year, things might have changed significantly. They'd hire like maybe 5 people and per year, and maybe with interns might be more, but just like, and then as in comparison, I think was it Deloitte or EY would hire like 20, 25, right? So it's just like, it's just the chances of getting in are a lot higher simply because they were hiring more people. These numbers, don't quote me on that, they may be off, but it was a lot. They would take a lot more students into the big four firms. Yeah, but anywhere this, I mean, this applies for pretty much any company, not just consulting. I mean, having a brand name does not hurt your chances at all. It always helps, but it doesn't hurt your chances in any instance. It's just that if you don't have it, which is totally fine, not everyone's gonna have it. If you don't have it, it just means my honest answer to you is then you have to make sure you're networking and really putting an intentional effort to get to know people in that company before you send your resume, so that they can see that you're a serious candidate as well. Just because it's just because of what Sajid said earlier, because a lot of them might have this recruiting policies as to they put a lot more attention on certain schools, and so for you it just means there's a bit more work from a networking standpoint. But honestly, if you have a great referral for a lot of companies in general, like that helps a lot, right? It never hurts to like build a few good relationships with people in great places.
Mm. And there was a related question from Sarah. Would you recommend top US schools over Canadian schools? Again, it just comes down to the ranking for the most part. I mean, there isn't really necessarily a difference, but there are some really top US schools and there's some not so great US schools. So most of the Canadian schools are great in Canada. On the international scale, they would be a little below the top. So again, it just comes down to how selective is the school and whether the school is a target school for these companies to hire.
And I would imagine, so I'm not an expert on like MBAs in Canada, but I also imagine that if you're applying in Canada, like the office would have put a huge emphasis on like the MBA programs there. So I think the question for you as well would be: are you trying to apply to consulting firm in the US or in Canada? Because if you want to stay local, then my guess is I would not hard to like apply from local, because I'm guessing the local, so that each the local office would be actively looking at local MBA programs and trying to find which students can we bring into our offices as well.
Yeah, that's true. And that's what a lot of the big four companies do. That person whom I networked with at Bain, he actually told me that Bain in Toronto hires pretty much exclusively from US schools. So
from US schools, okay.
Pretty much exclusively, yeah. So so you do, even though you might want to come back to Canada, just the nature that some of the top US schools are more selective, and some of the top European schools, they would be just generally providing you a better profile or reflecting a better profile onto you by the mere nature of you getting into this school. So you will have a better chance of getting into these firms.
But one last piece of advice there is this. So pretty much most of what we share in this presentation is we try to generalize it, right? The best way to truly understand what the best thing to do for you is to make sure you are speaking to somebody who's gone through the path that you want to go into. So for instance, like you are currently based in Canada and you want to go into a consulting firm based in the US. So you find somebody who's done that exact track and can talk about the specific experience, because each individual company will have certain nuances. And this is something that also during the program I can help people figure out, but you want to make sure that you're understanding how each company works, right? We can share general guidelines because this is a big presentation with many people, but the actual specific approach that you should take should be based off understanding what company you want to work with. And it's going to be different. A boutique consulting firm versus an MBB firm, they're going to have different approaches, right? Boutique consulting firm might focus on specifically looking at local applicants. And then, like you said, the bigger companies might be more keen on hiring people from anywhere in the world, so long as they've attended a top MBA program.
Exactly, and that's why in our consulting mastery program, we're going to have a lot fewer people and a lot more interaction. So we'll actually be able to talk about specifically your case, because again, everybody is different. Just like when you come to study with us and you go through a GMAT course, it's a group course because we always learn the same things, and most of us, most most of you've been to our class, you would notice that most of the things that we teach are the things that you didn't know before. However, when it comes to the MBA applications or consulting applications, some people, as you've heard that many times, you've heard that abbreviation MBB. So MBB, and some people are thinking, well, MBA is kind of step number one, step A, and MBB is step number two, step B. Right? Because it's actually very competitive, and it's probably more competitive than the MBA step. So and a lot of it is really coming down to these individual work and preparing you personally, because we're all very different. That's why we don't run a group necessarily group course on getting into an MBA program. But when it comes to the management consulting, there are a lot of things that you need to learn. And that's why there's going to be the program with group classes, case interviews. There's going to be a lot of training in that. And then, of course, there's going to be a lot of one-on-one thing, which is actually brings us to an interesting question from May, who is asking, how can interviewees work on becoming well-spoken? So sometimes if people, let's say, get flustered and stumble on answers other than intelligently making the point across, just because they may be a little bit nervous, how can they really become well-spoken? Is that possible? Is that something that somebody could get trained to present themselves better at the interview, especially if the interviewer is intentionally trying to be intimidating, or maybe just an intimidating person? What do you think? Is that
Yeah,
something that
absolutely. My first interviewer was very intimidating, and he was just not smiling, and it just threw me off because, as you guys can tell, I like to smile a lot, and so it throws me off when the other person just has a straight. But anyway, yes, you can, and the short answer is it's through practice, right? So you do more. You do multiple mock cases, and each case has very specific feedback. So one big thing that we work on during a case interview is structuring. So the way I run case interviews with clients is very simple. I run it like an actual interview, like it's a role play, right? You show up and I have my questions for you and you answer. I time you, and at the end of it, I give you feedback as to how to improve each area. So I say for this type of question, let's give an example, right? You have a math question and you solve it. So I'd say to you, here's how you solve a math question in the future. Step number one is you share your approach. Before you even start running the calculations, you want to make sure you're sharing your high level approach. You're saying, to be able to solve this question, I need to do this, this, and that. And then you work through your calculations and you're checking it. So that's what I mean when I say it's a very structured feedback on how you speak. It's based off how people would have done real projects in real life, right? If you're working with a client, you'd always tell them, this is what I'm going to do. And then you go do it and you keep checking in with them every day, every 2 days. And then eventually you come to the final answer and then you tell them what does this mean for you? Like, what's your next step? That's exactly how how I train my clients to speak during interviews. So if you're solving the math, you try to mirror how you would run projects. So it's something that you can get trained on. And that's pretty much all I do is I train people on how to solve case interviews by being more structured in their communications, figuring out how there's certain frameworks that you can learn. That's another term that you'll hear a lot. And so we practice different types of frameworks to help you solve the most commonly asked type questions and how to generate insights from exhibits. So oftentimes you'll see a chart and we'll talk you through how you read the chart. So it's a very specific process. And honestly, it's like once you've done it a couple of times, like you get it. It's just more about getting practice reps in. And so that's what I do. I teach people what's expected of them and give them opportunities to practice.
perfect? A skill could be trained, right? And it comes with knowing the right structure. So that's why a lot of this work is really done one-on-one, and we've put together this program to make it more accessible to more people. And there's benefit of being in class and working with other people as well. So a lot of the things that we need to teach you, instead of you coming and working with Olivia one-on-one for many hours, we're going to teach them to you in a class, and then we'll be able to interact, and you'll be able to practice with Olivia directly, and also with other people in the class as well.
Yeah, so those
there are a couple of questions.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say those group sessions will include case interview workshops, and it's essentially you run an actual case in a group setting. And that's to your earlier question around whether you can learn how to speak during case interviews. That's the whole point of that class, is to teach you to run an actual interview in a group setting so that you're seeing how you would have been assessed for your performance.
And that's why the live classes are really something that I personally look forward to, because in a live class, you'll be able to actually do some presentations, you'll be able to interact, you'll be able to talk. There might be some of the tasks where you have to actually work with a group. And the idea is, here at Admit Master, we're really big on skills development. It's really all, even the GMAT, it's really all about having the right skill set. And some people are asking, well, do you need a specific skill set to be a consultant? So the idea is, throughout this program, we are going to be teaching you this skill set. We'll identify what skill set there are. We'll do a gap analysis. So identify what are the skills that perhaps you're missing. What do you need in order to develop them? We'll coach you on developing these skills. And you'll have access also to Olivia by email, even after your coaching sessions. So if you need some advice on how you can continue developing them. So for some of you, it might be, I want to get into management consulting, but later in the future, how can I start developing these skills now? And for some of you, again, it might be, I don't feel like it's right for me, right? So so just and I believe we already answered this question. What do you need a specific skill set to be a consultant? What are
Oh,
Olivia
okay.
would?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the answer is, if you're coming in for entry level positions, they will teach you everything you need to learn, everything you need to know to do the job. And so you just want to be successful, you need to be the kind of person that picks up knowledge quickly and you're like ready to go, because you learn a lot in a very short period of time. So you can kind of feel so you see, if you enjoy learning, which is why I said earlier, if you're intellectually curious, you like learning, I think you would enjoy it, right? So they teach you everything from, I'm giving my example, like coming out of college, the things I didn't know and ended up learning. For some of you, this will be basic because you've had like 7 years of experience. But when I joined consulting, I'd done an internship at IBM. I'd maybe done one other internship at a bank. But aside from those, I'd never really been in the workspace. And so the things that I learned was everything from how to create PowerPoints, right? PowerPoint presentations, because you spend a lot of time doing that. It's not uncommon to see a PowerPoint presentation with 100 slides. But more importantly, it's how to communicate it's not that the PowerPoint is the end goal, right? The goal is like, how are you communicating all this like big recommendations to senior level executives, right? You're giving this PowerPoint presentations to people who will make decisions that will affect institutions that are very large. So you're having that kind of impact. Conducting analysis, you spend a ton of time trying to use data to come up with recommendations, and then present. Then there are other tools that you learn. I mean, it's just very specific to what kinds of project you're on. So like if you're doing an implementation project, there's some type of like project implementation tool that you end up using. You use Tableau. So some of you will, my guess is if you've worked for a couple of years, you probably have most of the skills that I'm talking about. But for those of you who are in college, you'll be learning this from scratch. That being said, like it helps a lot if you enjoy working with data. It helps a lot. It helps a lot if you enjoy working in teams, like you have some sort of leadership skills, like those types of intrinsic skills. Like if you have those, you will probably enjoy working as a consultant, but that doesn't mean that you actually need to know how to do the work of a consultant. We have people coming in. This is kind of the funniest thing about consulting, right? You could see somebody come in as an MBA. Actually, one of my friends had this exact story, right? He's an MBA student. He had about 5 years of experience. And then he comes in and he's on a team, and his manager is somebody who's like 2 years out of college. And that manager who was 2 years out of college is training him because he didn't have business background. Like aside from his MBA, he hadn't worked in traditional like business roles. So he was, and so this person who's been in consulting from 2 years is teaching him how to like create an analysis, right? He's teaching him how to create a PowerPoint presentation. So I hope that answers your question. You do not need to know the actual work the consultants do, but you should have the intrinsic skills that we talked about before if you want to enjoy the job.
Exactly, and that actually that brings us to an interesting question from Dina, and that is, in terms of tasks, in what way do you have to show you're adding value to a project to make an impact? For example, if there are 10, maybe 2 or 10 people doing different tasks in the same project, how are you getting evaluated to make it to the manager level in the consulting firm?
Yeah. You guys asked me a really good question. So, how do you bring value? I mean, one thing that I observed is people who are, how do I describe it? Like they fully take charge of their project. So I mentioned that you have your specific work stream. So there'll be like two types of people that you'll meet. There'll be person A who has this mindset of like, in most jobs you're given your boss tells you exactly what to do and you do it. And then there'll be the second person who's more of actively owning the project. They think of it as like their own thing. It's like their own business. They're always thinking about, what do I need to do tomorrow? What do I need to do 2 days from now? What do I need? So they're always thinking 10 steps ahead. They're coming to their manager and they're telling them, hey, we need to do this. Our client said this and I want to do this. So they're always coming up with solutions versus just saying like, hey, I encountered this problem. And then asking the manager for guidance on how to solve it. Like it's vice versa. So if you have that mindset of always like you're always leading your project forward, you're always leading your team forward, you would probably be considered as like a big value to the team, and you would probably get promoted sooner. From a more technical standpoint, like if you end up picking up on the actual the technical skills, which is mostly, like I said, Excel and PowerPoint, like if you end up knowing how to like run all this analysis, how to create good presentations that don't have too many mistakes, like you're probably going to have a much easier time getting promoted to the next round. But yeah, I think the biggest, if I had to summarize the one big thing that I saw with my one friend that got promoted really quickly, it's just that he really had this like owning mindset, and he's just really like always thinking ahead, showing up to the client side really early and setting up all these meetings and just always doing something and then asking if it's okay versus like always just versus stating like, hey, I have this problem, how do I solve it? So it's more of a mindset thing more than anything else, that then impacts your work. But they will tell you, each firm will tell you, like most of the firms, like from my experience is just looking at so one thing I'm gonna recommend for those of you here is go on social media and check all this consulting like pages, because you learn a lot about the job through all the jokes that they share, or even Twitter, or just like whatever social media tool you use, because you'll find that these pages are created by actual consultants, and so you can kind of learn a little bit about the job through the anecdotes they share. It's not always accurate, so I wouldn't pay like too much close attention to it, but once in a while you can just peruse through and see like the jokes that they share, because some of it is accurate. But yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And there was actually a question from Dina. Is there any sort of a certification that's associated with being a consultant?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, you could sign up for so there are all these classes that there are all these online classes that you can take while you're already a consultant to help you like improve your technical skill set. So the types of certifications that I saw people getting were just like Tableau is a good one. Like you can take a Tableau class, and then when you finish the class, they give you a check, and then you take an advanced class. Um, but I wouldn't say that anyone would ask you like, hey, do you have this certificate? No one asks you. It's just more for if you really like that work and you want to do more of that kind of work, you would take it so that you learn the skill. Uh, but no, I mean, just being part of the company is sort of that's sort of your certificate, right? You have that on your resume, you have that on your LinkedIn. That's it. I can't think of anything else.
I see a few comments here in the chat box also from people who've already interviewed at consulting firms, and some of them are in like late 20s. Some of the people are saying, I'm in my 30s. We have a question, does age hinder you from getting an entry-level position? So my advice would be, if you've already interviewed and you think that this is what you want to do, my wife's telling me I should probably apply to management consulting firms. I say, well, there's no work-life balance, so you're not going to see me at all, even if I make it. So so maybe let's not necessarily go there. I love the career that I'm doing right now, but what would you say? What would be your advice to people who perhaps are jumping in maybe at a little bit later stage, and maybe for people who've already tried and haven't necessarily been successful, haven't been able to convince the consulting firms that they are good candidates? Is there is is there hope? Is there a plan? Or would the program that we offer, for example, work? Or is there anything else you would recommend for these people to do?
So the first group of people are people who are older, and most yes, a lot of people apply, especially during MBAs. This tend to be, I don't know the exact age. I don't really go around asking people the exact age, but late 20s and 30s is, you do see it. What I tend to see is if you've been working for a few years, like it might, you might be able to position yourself as on the expert track, versus applying for the generalist role. So, because when I think about, looking at someone's resume, if somebody has done 7 years in, let's just take an example like supply chain, right? You could, it doesn't make sense for that person to just apply for a generalist role. In that case, like, leverage what your expertise is and say, I'm going to come into the firm and I have this background and I want to apply to be an expert in this area. And so you're networking with people who do that kind of work. So that's my advice for you. If you're trying to break in and you've been out, you've had a couple of years of experience, is think about networking with people in that specific industry, in that specific, who are in that specific type of work, and then try to understand what opportunities are there for people who have that background. Because I think that will make you a more attractive candidate versus just applying for a generalist position, right? And if you failed before, you can certainly apply again. My guess is like were you probably failed in the resume stage, right? Because that's where just statistically speaking, majority of people fail in that stage. And so it goes back to what I was saying, which is you'd have to try and go around the system. So most people just submit their resume in an online portal and then wait to hear back. But if you're applying to the top firms, you have to remember that they're receiving so many applications, and most times they don't have that many people to go through them. So they might not have even seen your application, right? So you need to make sure that your application is being seen. You have to give yourself the best chance of being considered. So you need to make sure that your application is being seen. And the best way to go, I mean, there isn't really a shortcut solution. It's always just goes back to like really tapping into your networks. But before you tap into your network, let's say understanding what your value add is. So you're not networking to tell somebody, hey, could you refer me? You're networking to show them what your value is and saying that you're exploring different options. Could we make time to talk, right? So there's a different way in which you approach it. You want to always, I mean, consulting is all about value, right? What value do you bring to the table? And if you're going to network, you need to show that value that you bring based on your experiences. And so that's the approach that I tell you. My guess is you probably applied online last time and that didn't work out. So this time, try it from a more relationship-based style in which you're showing value.
And again, I love analogies. So sometimes I liken this, getting into, let's say, into management consulting, or getting into a business school is kind of you going into a jungle in Amazon, and not the Amazon that we use now, but the real Amazon. And there's so many different things that are unknown. So we always have somebody who is not necessarily not necessarily better or smarter than us, but it's somebody who knows the way. And when you go to Amazon, you want somebody who knows the way to be next to you. So perhaps if the interviews didn't go well, or if anything in the process didn't go well, find that help. And we'd love for you to work with us, and we'd love to help you. If you have a friend who can help you, show you the way, that's great. Sometimes with advice, you get what you pay for. And you also want somebody to be really invested in your success, but I'll let you make this decision. It's not the decision we can make for you. And most importantly is, if you didn't figure it out by now, don't rely on internet forums, because sometimes you have good advice, sometimes not necessarily good advice. Right? And certainly if you do rely on internet forums, rely mostly, hear both the stories of people who didn't get in and people who did get in. But networking usually works a little bit better, and how you talk to these people, how do you really connect with them, how do you plan for this career. That's why if you work with us, we are going to, this program is going to be structured. You are going to have access to classes for a year, and you're going to have access to the email support for a year as well. And then you'll be able to use these coaching sessions also for the next 6 months. So you'll get prepared. You want to make sure that you really get the most benefit, and then you will get continued ongoing support as well. I see there's actually just one question that I still hear. So if anybody has any more questions, and Thanks so much, Olivia, for sticking around. We still have a lot of people here, so this is a really interesting topic. Really, certainly piques a lot of our minds because there's just such a huge opportunity for us to make sure that we can position our career in such a way that now the opportunities are looking for us. That's why getting into a top MBA program or getting into an MBB firm or getting into any of the top consulting firms is really something that just elevates you on a different level. And that brings us to this last question that we have so far. What really differentiates the MBB firms from each other? Is that something that you could possibly comment on?
Yeah, that was okay. It's such a good question because yeah, during the recruiting period, um, they always when you do your interviews, they always ask you why X, like whichever company. If you apply to Bain, why BCG, why? Because, and most people just don't know what to say because at the end of the day, you just want to get into one of them. Most people don't even like care. They just want to get into one of them. So the way I would look at it is it's based. So I did mention that because they're such big companies, they all do tons of project across different industries, across different like functional practices. But there's a bit more. Some of them are known for certain things, right? And so if you're really like, and a good example is that someone I spoke to decided to choose Bain. I think they had offers from Bain and McKinsey, and they chose Bain because they really, actually, to be fair, they really just wanted to be with their friends. That was a real answer. But aside from that, I think because their friend got into Bain, and so they said they wanted to go to Bain so that they could be together. But anyway, the second reason they gave me was because of the finance. Bain is known in the finance space quite well, and so that's like one example is from the content work. The content is a bit different, right? The types of work they do. um, if you're really keen on another good example is the location. So I remember when I was applying, so I didn't mention this in my presentation, but I'm originally from Kenya, right? I've been living in the US for a really long time, but at the time I was applying, I remember looking into which of these firms have presence in Africa. I was just very curious. And at the time, specifically in Nairobi, at that time, McKinsey was the only one that had an office in Nairobi. I think things have changed now. So that's another difference is, so first you're looking at the types of work, second you're looking at the geography, and then third from a brand perspective, which ties into my second point actually. So like another client told me that they wanted to work at BCG because they really cared about public sector work in Southeast Asia, right? So that's how people choose. It's just what's the exact, you have to really understand your exact goal, which is why I have a session, one of the offerings for the program is just to have a strategy session because you have to understand what your exact goal is. And that will help you decide what types of companies are good for you. At the end of the day, like I say to people, any of the top consulting firms will be excellent. They can still learn a lot, great resumes. But when it comes down to it, if you are so lucky and end up having multiple offers, it comes down to like, they tend to be very similar in terms of the salary, and a lot of these firms like will match whatever. So if one company decides to increase the salary, the others will try to match it. They're always competing like that, right? So you end up finding that the salaries are quite similar, and and then the types of work is the actual work you do, like Excel, PowerPoint, is quite similar. Travel style, now I guess there's no travel, but before, like you were typically traveling for the project, so that was similar as well. So it really came down, people's decisions really came down to like the brand, and specifically like what is the brand in a specific region, right? Like some companies are really well known in Africa, others in Asia. So you're looking at that and trying to decide what makes sense based on your specific goal.
And one of the things that we're going to do in the consulting mastery program is that we're actually going to have a session about how do you decide what sort of a consulting career are you interested in getting into, and then you're going to have some homework, and then you're going to have a chance to interact with Olivia again and review your homework. But this is one of the huge benefits of this program is there's going to be a structure. So some of you might be thinking, well, it'd be nice to get into consulting career, but where do I start? Do I begin do I hire a really expensive coach and begin working with a coach right away? Like what do I do? Do I talk to a lot of people? So uh, what you're gonna walk out of at the end of the 6 weeks, you're gonna say, I'm actually now I have a much clearer understanding of what's right for me. And if the management consulting career is right for me, then I'm actually so glad I did this work within a compressed period of time over about 6 weeks, that now I have a lot of clarity on where I need to go. And so that's really the objective, is to help you take a lot of the things that might potentially take years and compress it into a very short period of time, give you the right structure so that you can make the best decision. And if, like we mentioned, at the end of this program, you're going to say, I don't really feel like management consulting is for me, you will have learned a lot of really valuable skills, interview skills, case interview skills. So if nothing else, when you get into an MBA program, you're going to be a lot better prepared. And then you might realize further down the road that you still would like to work in consulting. I have some friends who work in consulting, but I have a friend, for example, who works in retail consulting. They help smaller retail companies organize their stores. So that's still consulting. They come in, and a store wants to open, or a company wants to open a new store, so they're going to do the research all about demographics, all about the traffic in the mall, and they're going to help them figure out how to make more money from that store, what sorts of products they need to sell, what kind of product line, whom do they hire, and so on, depending on, again, demographics maybe in that city, on the traffic, and so on. So there are all kinds of different consulting that you can do. And of course, as part of this is consulting talk, which is a little bit about how do you sell yourself, how do you position yourself as an expert. Because remember what Olivia was saying is that you have to come across, you might be given an advice to a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and you are a junior consultant perhaps. So you have to sound very confident, and we're going to be working on some of your confidence skills and how do you actually come across as an expert, even though perhaps maybe deep inside you don't really feel that you know more than the CEO of this company, but yet the CEO of this company is going to heed your advice. So it does require a certain frame of mind. And so we're going to be working in the program as well, in case you're curious.
Yeah, the last thing I want to throw in is I know we both have the tendency to divert to like the top 10 consulting firms just because most people, that's what they think about. But to be clear, of course, this is not specific for those companies. Like one of my recent clients was looking for an internal promotion at Microsoft, right? She was not even looking for like management consulting, but she was looking for the practice. She was looking for case interview practice because they're using that type of interview. They'll be giving her that type of interview to determine whether she should get promoted. So it's not like, I've also had a client who was not even in business space. So a lot of times, like, we might talk about the top 7 to 10 firms and just throw out those names quite a bit, but it's not limited to those, right? This program is not, it's for anyone who's interested in consulting in general, but you might also just be curious and end up deciding you want a different business role, and that's still fine.
Exactly. And part of the process of becoming a consultant is you need to have the right skill set, right? Or the right frame of mind of being a consultant. And that's one of the things that we're going to actually focus in the program. So it's not in a way to somehow teach you how to misrepresent yourself, to get into management consulting where you might feel that you don't really belong there. This is not really what it's about. It's really about how do you develop this skill set, and then how do you communicate this skill set so that you become a desirable candidate for the consulting firms. That's really what it's all about.
And I see 19 people stay to the end. This is incredible. Thank you to all of you. I cannot see the comments chat. So I cannot see the comments section, so I don't know who it is, but just giving you all a shout out. Thank you so much for sticking with us. I know we
staying for over an hour of Q&A.
And yeah, please connect with me on LinkedIn. It's just my name here, Olivia Barnard. If you type that in, you can find me on LinkedIn. If you have additional questions, you can also send there. You can, or you can send directly to Sergey.
Perfect. Thank you so much again for everybody. We hope to see you in this program. Like you mentioned, it's the first 20 people. We're going to have a chance to do this all live. And we're going to go a lot deeper into everything that we talked about. There's going to be plenty of opportunity for one-on-one interaction as well. Somebody was asking in the chat box, when does the program start? So we will start before the end of April. It's going to be, we're just looking at the exact dates. And it's going to be around kind of the 20th of April. And this is when we're going to start live classes for 6 weeks.
Yeah, Sergey, a quick follow-up for you. So if they want to start working sooner than that, could you help them know if they could do that? If they could,
Yeah.
if they want to start working, they have an interview coming up and they want to start working sooner, before April.
Yeah, definitely, it's possible. As you've noticed, with some of these programs, they require, or some of these programs include coaching. Or actually, all of them include coaching. But the higher programs, the candidate packages include a lot more coaching. So you can front load some of this coaching, and you're still going to be, even if you just take the coaching and don't even come to classes, you're still getting an amazing value, because just the coaching alone would be more than the cost of the program. So if you're just interested in the coaching, then you could take that as well. There's going to be a more cost-effective way, but you will have classes as well. You can certainly front load all of things. Just reach out to us. If you could talk about your own personal situation, we'll help you figure out what would be the best path going forward. And like we mentioned, we are a big believer here at Atlantis. We will love partnering with people like Olivia, who do a lot of this very detailed, very personal, very in-depth one-on-one work, because there's a lot of the things that are going to be really individualized to you personally. We're all unique, we're all different, yet we do need similar skills. That's why a lot of the training is going to be on the skills that everybody needs to know. But then a lot of these discussions or the coaching is going to be one-on-one, and we certainly can start even sooner. You don't have to wait. All right. Well, I think with this, we'll probably wrap the session for today. We are going to be doing another session a week from now. It is going to be a lunchtime session. So with that lunchtime session, we are going to go to a faster pace. There's going to be less, perhaps a smaller opportunity to answer questions, just because we do want to stick with timing. For most people, take about an hour of their time. So we're really glad that we had a lot of plenty opportunities. Again, thank you so much for sticking around. Thank you so much, Olivia, for staying and for answering all of these questions, and for being so open to sharing your experience and some of the experience of your clients as well. So you are welcome to join that session. However, we will be sharing very similar things to what we're doing now. And then, of course, in the main program, we're going to be going a lot deeper. If you have any personal questions, reach out to us directly. If you have any questions about getting into an MBA program, or if you have any questions specifically about how this program is going to be structured, feel free to reach out to me. If you have any personal questions about your personal situation, like where are you in your career, and how perhaps you can start transitioning to management consulting, feel free to connect with Olivia on LinkedIn or send an email, and we'll do our best to help you. That's why we're here.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Y'all are the best.
Take care. All the best.